It's Friday, August 30th. I'm Matt Harmon. Welcome to the Yahoo Fantasy Forecast, presented by Toyota, the official automotive partner of the NFL. And it is a hell of a day to talk ball. And join me to do just that is a whole lot of people, because we have made it, folks. This is the final pod of Cram Week, and it concludes our draft season coverage. And we know for the majority of you, your most important drafts will be this holiday weekend. How do we know this? Well, we have some internal data to share. Nearly 70% of all Yahoo Fantasy drafts will take place in the next 3 to 5 days. That is millions, with a capital M, millions of drafts. Also, a reminder, and oh boy, are you going to miss this live read. If you sign up for a fantasy league on Yahoo Fantasy, you will be automatically entered to win $1 million. That's a whole hell of a lot of money. If any of the players you start score a touchdown in the week 1 games on NBC and Peacock, that's Ravens at Chiefs, Packers at Eagles, Rams at Lions, whole lot of good players right there. You're going to earn bonus entries into the sweepstakes. The deadline is September 5th, so stop wasting time. Get your fantasy league going on Yahoo right now. With all that said, let's get into it. For some of you, we know you've been bombarded with information all month, hell, maybe even all summer. And now you get to finally use that information this weekend. We know for a lot of you, probably, maybe even most of you, you're cramming all this info after having a life this offseason. Don't know what that's like. Must be nice. We know the time is of the essence. Some of you may have a draft as you're listening to this. Aggressive, but don't hate it. Or more likely, you have one in mere hours, which is why today's pod includes every single Yahoo Fantasy analyst sharing their final piece of draft advice. It's also why this is the shortest pod of the year. You got to get this thing going here. You got to get this podcast in, and you got to get to your draft. So without further ado, you will hear in order in this first segment, Andy Behrens, Sal Vetri, and Kate Magdziuk share their final piece of draft advice. Andy, take it away.
The best advice I can give heading into the last big draft weekend is fairly simple, difficult to execute, but fairly simple to say. And that is, I want you to get out to a hot start. I want you to worry about the month of September. Sweep September if you can. I don't want you thinking about distant bye weeks. I don't want you thinking about strength of schedule in November or December. And I certainly don't want you collecting a bunch of injured players at your draft. Like, you can take one of, let's say, Nick Chubb, Jonathan Brooks, Hollywood Brown, TJ Hawkinson, but you can't collect all of them. Don't make long-term plans and think that you're going to have some unstoppable juggernaut by the time November rolls around. Let me give you a little data to support this. Last year in Yahoo public leagues, if you started 3-0, you had a 73% chance to make your league's playoffs. If you started 0-3, you had a 12% chance. You were cooked. It wasn't happening. You weren't making it. No matter what kind of team you put together for November, it didn't really matter if you got out to the gate slow. The best favor that you can do yourself in fantasy football is to get out to a hot start. It makes this game so much simpler.
My final piece of draft advice. Your drafts are here. It's ready to roll. You need some strategy. You know all the player takes by this point. The final piece of draft advice that I want to share with you, because this has burned me in the past, and I don't want that to be you this year, is beware of the injury discount players. Now, what do I mean by this? I'm looking more so at some of these guys who are coming off of serious injuries and probably leaning more towards the veterans here. I'm looking at Nick Chubb. I'm looking at TJ Hawkinson. These guys, like a Nick Chubb, who's going in round 8 of fantasy drafts right now. Let me just tell you who he's going around. He's going around guys like Deontay Johnson, a potential number 1 receiver for his team. He's going around guys like Devin Singletary, basically the sure-in number 1 running back for the New York Giants. Those guys are healthy to start week 1. Nick Chubb, the reports right now, he won't be ready for week 1. Beat reporters are saying that he's going to be trending to maybe go on the PUP list, miss at least 4 weeks, and the team is saying they're hopeful to have him back at some point this year. You don't want these headaches, even when he does come back. If he comes back, it's the type of thing with these older players, and Hawkinson is the same case, who might come back mid-season. Once they're back, are they really back? How many weeks does it take to get ramped up for them? How many weeks does it take to get back to their full explosiveness? Usually at least a couple, maybe even a month or 2. So you don't want these headaches. When they're back, it's the worst thing. Am I starting them over this guy? Am I not? How much am I getting? And you have frustration. Just don't want those headaches. We've seen it every single year. Guys, this time of year, they start to get healthier. You see Nick Chubb, he's sprinting on the field. He's doing these heavy squats, all these things. But the doctors will tell you these aren't the things that you need to see. We saw it last year with Javonte Williams. We saw it the year before that with J.K. Dobbins. Guys coming off of serious injuries, serious knee injuries, like a Nick Chubb. These guys, they get a lot of hype. The season starts, it's either a re-injury or not the same player for most, if not the entire season. So beware of these injury discounts. There's a lot of them in your drafts. Now, I will say, the one thing is, this isn't you can't ever draft an injured player. You have to take it case by case. I'm talking about the serious injuries. Guys who are going to be back week 1, like a Christian McCaffrey, there's no concerns. They're saying that he's ready to play. You don't have to worry about that. Younger players who are going to be fine. They said that this is their timeline of a week 2 or a week 3, maybe a Jonathan Brooks of the Panthers, younger, quicker return to play. They're not concerned about it lingering. This is kind of the timeline. It's on track. Okay, that's fine. Same thing with some guys dealing with smaller injuries. But those serious injuries, beware of them. When you're ready to click, just think twice about how many headaches you're going to have during the season trying to start those guys once they're actually back.
For my final piece of draft advice, I want to remind you all of one of my favorite fantasy football tips. It is always better to start positional runs. Do not finish them. It can be super tempting to hop into a positional run once you see it unfolding. I get it. Your palms start to sweat. You get a little antsy, but chill out. I get it. You don't want to be stuck with slim pickings while everybody else has some top-tier quarterback, top-tier tight end options, but I need you to remain calm. I implore you to take advantage of positional runs and pivot in other directions while fantasy managers are feasting on those positional runs. Don't draft a player just because that is how a particular round in the draft or two are unfolding. If there's a slew of quarterbacks off the board, that's a great time to pivot and take advantage of some players at other positions, maybe tight end, wide receiver, running back, that are being neglected because people feel like they have to go with the positional runs. Maybe tight ends are on a run. That's okay. There will be options. Don't panic and buy into a positional run just because it's there. Always deploy a steadfast determination not to overreact to how the draft board plays out, and play the board as best as you possibly can, which usually just means drafting the best player available and not getting swayed by all of the other managers in your league.
So you heard from Andy on why you need to win the month of September. Sal told you to stay away from guys coming off of serious injuries. And Kate wants you to start those positional runs, not end them. After the break, we hear from the rest of the Yahoo Fantasy analysts right after this. All right, we're back. And for the first part of the segment, you're going to hear, in order, Scott Pianowski and Dan Titus talk about what strategies you should employ at the wide receiver and running back position. Roll the clip.
People are always asking me, what's the biggest thing you need to know going into your fantasy draft roster build? What am I looking for? I'll tell you what you want. You want the best wide receiver room in the league. You want wide receivers who start themselves. Because what you don't want to do is be week to week, like, which wide receiver 3 or 4, which fringy guy do I play? Who's due for spike week? Oh, this guy had 3 targets last week. I'm not going to play him. Then he has a big game. This guy had a big game last week. I'm going to play him. And he has an off week. You want those receivers who start themselves. And my builds are going to be usually one running back I like. It can be round 1, 2, 3, or 4. It doesn't matter. I'm going to pound the receivers. There's unbelievable depth at the quarterback position. You can do well at any price point. I'm getting a lot of Jordan Love this year. I'm fine with that. Trevor Lawrence is my QB2 in a lot of leagues. I'm fine with that. Maybe Jaden Daniels breaks the game at football. You don't have to go nuts at quarterback, but receiver dries up quickly. Running backs, we all know that position is always chaotic. Even tight end, I don't think it's that deep, but there's 9 or 10 I feel really good about. I can wait till the second wave comes around. I want you to have the best receiver room in the league. I want you to tweet at me, X at me, whatever they call that platform, and share it with me, and we will ride into the glorious championship sunset together. Dominate at wide receiver. That's where you need to be in 2024.
My fantasy advice for y'all is to execute a hero RB draft strategy. Now, what that means is you're going to be spending one of your early round picks, that's rounds 1 through 3, on a running back. Why do I say to do that when zero RB has been all the rage for the last several seasons, especially considering all the viable, prolific pass catchers available in the early rounds? It's because when you look past rounds 5 and beyond, that dead zone is ugly. Don't worry about it. Don't be frustrated by trying to hit the jackpot by landing that RB2 that's going to eventually be an RB1. Build out that depth later in the draft. Focus on getting one RB to anchor your fantasy squad this year. That way you can avoid the dead zone, pick up some value later rounds, because there's plenty of wide receivers available in those mid rounds that you don't need to spend up and go wide receiver, tight end, quarterback right away. So avoid the dead zone, get yourself a hero RB.
So you heard a strategy for wide receivers and running backs. Up next, you're going to hear Dalton Del Don on what to do at the quarterback and tight end position, and then you'll hear from Tera Roberts on how you can maximize your draft board.
My last piece of draft advice heading into the season would be to make sure to get your guys. Every league has different settings or a completely different type of drafting room, so it's tough to give a blanket recommendation. Generally, I like targeting running quarterbacks and an upper tier tight end this season, and I'm fine grabbing an anchor back early too. But don't worry too much about ADP and go after the guys you want more than anything else. My guys this year include Breece Hall, Devon Achane, Cooper Kupp, Malik Neighbors, Kenneth Walker, and of course, Anthony Richardson. But I will be wrong about many players this year. Predicting football is hard. So above all else, make sure to leave your draft with players you wanted to target heading into it. Good luck in your 2024 fantasy drafts.
As you are wrapping up your fantasy drafts, I want to give you one last minute piece of advice to absolutely crush your fantasy drafts. And it is use the draft board to your advantage. During your draft, keep an eye on your league mates drafting around you. You can use their rosters in order to gauge your picks. Let's use an example here. Let's say that you are drafting in the 10th spot and it's round 5. Your turn is coming up and you've got a few guys queued up, but you're torn. You don't know which one to take. You love them all. And maybe you're looking at one wide receiver, 2 quarterbacks that you're trying to decide between, but you love them both. You'd be okay with either one. Look at the rosters for the 11th and 12th spot. If one of those guys already has a quarterback and you've got 2 quarterbacks that you're perfectly fine with taking, only one of those league mates is going to potentially take a quarterback. You are literally guaranteed to get one of the guys that you like. So instead of taking the quarterback there, you can just take the wide receiver. He is going to be right there for you, and you can just grab the quarterback at your next turn in round 6. You get 2 of the guys that you queued up, no problem. Everything goes perfectly for you there. Another great example would be maybe you're a fan of late round drafting for tight ends. Maybe that's your strategy, and you're trying to figure out just how late you're trying to wait, figure out 3 tight ends maybe that you're comfortable with taking. Watch the tight ends, start to fill up on teams. You can use the board to literally play a game of chicken. Using the draft board to your advantage pays off even more if you know what your league mates' tendencies are. It decreases the chances of you getting sniped, and it increases your potential chances for value picks.
Shout out to Dalton and Tera. There's one last piece of advice to give, and what do you know? It's coming from me, your boy. And while I bet you think you know what I'm going to talk about, I may just surprise you. Stay tuned after this final break. Welcome back to our final segment, our keys to winning, presented by Toyota, the official automotive partner of the NFL. And here's my keys to winning your draft, aka my final piece of draft advice. Do not be afraid of uncertainty at the running back position in rounds 2 to 3 this year because, well, if you are, I don't think you're going to be making very many picks in that range. And sure, you can go full 0 RB, but my personal favorite builds have been hero RB builds this year. And if you miss out on that first tier of backs, your CMCs, your Breece Hall, your Bijan Robinson, love those picks, but maybe you're just in a range to snag a tier 1 wide receiver. That's the guy that you liked at the board at that point. And then you don't get a shot at Jahmyr Gibbs or Jonathan Taylor around that round 1-2 turn. I still think you're going to want at least one anchor running back there. But all the guys with ADPs between 13 and 35 overall at running back carry some degree of uncertainty, or at least one possible ceiling and or floor diminishing red flag. It's just going to be about picking your spots here and deciding which risk you think is worth taking. So with that said, let's go through the options, and you can weigh these risks and decide which ones matter and which ones don't for yourself. Let's start with Saquon Barkley, 14th overall ADP. He's probably going to have a touchdown ceiling problem sharing the backfield with Jalen Hurts. We also saw his rushing success rate, yards per carry, and explosive run rate metrics dip last year. Then there's Derrick Henry, who technically has climbed into round 1 on Yahoo ADP, pretty aggressive, but I'm going to include him here anyways because in general, across the industry, that is where he goes. I bet he's going to go there in your drafts this weekend, and he is my primary, or at least one of my primary round 2 running back targets because he's a legendary player transferring to a great ecosystem. Yet, he's also a 30-year-old back with an intense mileage count. Henry is not a normal NFL running back, but this is typically the exact archetype of player we try to fade at the position. Then there's Kyren Williams, 17th overall ADP. He's going to have to contend with Blake Corum being added to the backfield after wearing down under heavy workloads in 2024. There's just like a non-0% chance Blake Corum looks good enough to turn this into a pseudo committee. There's also all the punt return nonsense circulating on the internet right now. But of course, you can listen to the episode earlier this week with Sal. This is why that's not really something you want to be panicking about at this point. Let's talk about Isaiah Pacheco, 18th overall ADP. He has never consistently owned a passing down role for the Kansas City Chiefs. The team mostly throws at the goal line too, under Patrick Mahomes, who led the league in completions inside the 10-yard line last year. Now they've signed Samaje Perine to possibly siphon off some of that very passing down work I mentioned in the vaunted Jerick McKinnon role. There's Travis Etienne, 22nd overall ADP, who averaged 3.7 yards per carry from week 10 on, as the Jaguars were one of the worst run games in the NFL last season. They didn't change much structurally or personnel-wise in the offseason and have spent another few months insisting that they want to lighten his workload. Then there's Devon Achane, 25th overall ADP. He is without question one of the most explosive players in the league, but there's almost no chance he becomes a true bell cow back given his size and player archetype. He's going to need to rely on both extreme efficiency and stay healthy to beat this draft slot. Finally, we have Josh Jacobs, 33rd overall ADP. He was just straight up not a plus starter in Las Vegas last year. He's coming off a down season, and now he plays for a coach who typically emphasizes a committee approach. His multi-year contract is a bit of a farce, so that isn't exactly the positive signal of commitment many believe it is. So again, this was purposefully designed to only present the bare case for each of those backs. If you've listened to the show this summer, you know I'm not out on all those guys or anything like that. This exercise was just meant to show you that this position is littered with uncertainty early on. And sometimes, as we know in fantasy football, when you lean into uncertainty or ambiguity and it goes your way, you're going to find your way to some significant profit. And I think this is all important because while wide receivers are all the rage, and you know that's where I butter, or I should say, spread the ghee on my sprouted grain bread, the more I've thought about fantasy football this year, the more I'm convinced it all starts at running back. How you approach, and if you hit on the ever-evolving running back position, will decide the fate of the rest of your team. No pressure. That is going to do it for us today. The next time you hear from me, oh baby, we will officially be getting ramped up for week 1. It is finally, nay, mercifully here. And we'll be back on Tuesday morning after the holiday weekend as Andy Behrens joins me to share our boldest fantasy predictions for the 2024 season. Accountability, who cares? We're just talking bold. We're just talking aggressive. We're just talking fun. And on that pod, speaking of fun, we're also going to reveal our fall podcast calendar. We have not 1, not 2, but 3 new weekly shows to debut, and we are so excited to share that news with you. This is really going to be the best season ever on the podcast. But until then, happy drafting, and we are out.